On coming to you from northern Iraq, what's known as Kurdistan, up here. I just got on the ground a couple hours ago, so I've been traveling. I left Panama yesterday. I guess it was yesterday or maybe the day before. I don't know. And I've been flying ever since. Flew from Panama to York, Vienna to Erbil, and got today. Fairly uneventful trip. For a long trip like that, answered a prayer for sure. And so I'm planning to be here in northern Iraq and Syria for the next couple of weeks. And we will, well, I don't know, maybe not even quite a couple of weeks, maybe a little less than that. So I wanted to give you an update and kind of let you know what's going on here, why I'm here, what I'm here to report on, etc. So thank you for watching. I appreciate all of you very much. Now, first of all, a little background on the Kurds. Help you understand a little bit more about these people. Kurds are a wonderful people group. There are almost 40 million Kurds around the world, and they are the largest people group on planet Earth that doesn't have their own country. And it's not for lack of trying. They right now exist across the area that they call Kurdistan, but is actually part of 4 different countries. So Kurdistan encompasses northern Iraq, northwestern Syria, part of Turkey, and part of northwestern Iran, eastern Syria, east of the Euphrates River, and part of Turkey. The majority of Kurds actually live in Turkey, and that's part of the problem because they've been agitating for something like what they have here in Iraq for a long time. So just help you understand, the Kurds who live in Iraq are the freest Kurds of all of Kurdistan, because they have a semi-autonomous state that is run by, they have their own president, their own parliament, their own military and police. They make their own laws up here. They have their own revenue from oil. And so the Kurds who live in northern Iraq, Kurdistan, like Kirkuk North, they have a ton of autonomy. The Kurds who live in Syria, when the civil war started, they pushed it into Syria, pushed up to the Euphrates River, and declared everything east of the Euphrates River in Syria to be Kurdistan, or what they call Rojava up there. And the Kurds, the majority of the Kurds, which live in Turkey, like 10 million of them live in Turkey, they wanted to have their own semi-autonomous state as well. And there were even some political parties that were advocating for an actual country. Well, Turkey's not about to give up its territory either for another country or for a semi-autonomous state. And so for decades, there has been this low-level war going on between extremist elements of the Kurdish forces and the Turkish army. So the Turks have gotten to the point where they see all Kurds as terrorists. And that's not true. Most Kurds are actually extremely progressive and open-minded. As a matter of fact, when I got here today, I was driving around looking for an ATM, and I probably passed 4 or 5 churches, big Christian churches with lit crosses on them, not hiding, very large, and obviously well-funded, well-attended churches, just in Erbil. The women, the Kurdish women, don't cover their hair. They don't go walking around in there, looking like they're wearing drapes like the women in other Muslim countries do. They don't do the full ninja suit or anything. They just dress normal, and they're beautiful, beautiful women. They have You can drink alcohol here. There are lots and lots of alcohol stores. And so this is a very open, Western, liberal democracy here in northern Iraq. And it's fairly safe. I mean, they don't have, car bombings and terrorist attacks up here on a regular basis. That they really kind of keep a lid on all that stuff. I've been to several churches here, and they're, Maronite, or I'm not Maronite, Syriac Christian, Chaldean Christian churches, and they are growing. And they do have a security guard out front, but they don't have a lot of issues with getting attacked. There have been a few attacks here and there. As a matter of fact, I had dinner a few years ago with a guy who was one of the wealthiest men in Kurdistan, and he built much of what is now downtown Erbil, and had thousands of apartments and condos and stuff that he had developed. He was kind of a Donald Trump of Kurdistan. And I think last year or the year before, there was a bomb that went off in his building that killed him and his members of his family. So I don't know who he got sideways with, but he got sideways with somebody, and they took him out. So I mean, it still is the Middle East for sure. Here you can go to the pharmacy and you can buy pretty much anything without a prescription if it's not a narcotic. So for example, you could go buy Ambien without a prescription. It's one of the few places that I've ever been on planet Earth where you can buy Ambien without a prescription. Somebody said that Kurds helped the Turks during the Armenian genocide. That's true. And that's a stain on the Kurdish culture, without a doubt, that they helped in the murder of all those, and not just murder, but systematic rape, taking little girls as concubines, things like that. And I guess you could say that was a different time, different era. And I, from what I understand, from what I know of the Kurds that I've met, are not antithetical to Armenia, and they like Armenia, they like Israel, and they just don't like, they like anybody who doesn't like Turkey, because Turkey is the real enemy for the Kurds. So here's a question: does all of Iraq have central? There it goes. Have central government, or how is northern Iraq governed? I just mentioned that the Kurds have their own government. They have their own parliament. They have their own military in the Peshmerga. And they're wonderfully hospitable people. Very, very nice. I would have no problem at all bringing my family here on vacation, although there's not a lot to see or do. It's, typical kind of desert, very dusty place. But, yeah, I mean, you could safely come here now. It's not safe. Now, during the war in Iraq, back in the global war on terror and in the first Gulf War, the Kurds like to brag that the United States did not lose one soldier in Kurdistan during the entire war. So all of the IEDs and everything, they kept those out of here, and it was a safe place for U.S. troops. Now, that's remarkable, and it's remarkable because the United States has abandoned the Kurds and has sort of left them hanging multiple times throughout their history. I was just looking up some of the older history of the Kurds, and they asked about, so post-World War I, after the Ottoman Empire collapsed, there was a treaty called the Treaty of Sevres in 1920 that promised the Kurds the possibility of an independent state and got their hopes up. But it was never implemented. And a few years later, three years later, in the Treaty of Lausanne, that replaced the Treaty of Sevres and didn't even mention the Kurds as a people group. And that's what carved up this area between Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. Now, in 1975, there was another agreement between the United States and the Kurds called the Algiers Agreement, where the United States and Iran supported the Kurdish rebels against the Iraqi government under Saddam Hussein. And then the U.S. yet again pulled out of the agreement and left the Kurds hanging. And then the Kurds got just crushed by Saddam Hussein. He came in and murdered thousands, tens of thousands of Kurds died. In one situation, Saddam Hussein used poison gas on the Kurds and killed thousands at one go. And Henry Kissinger at that time had kind of a quote. He had a quote that's kind of famous. He said, "Covert action should not be confused with missionary work." So what he meant was we shouldn't be helping people just to help them. If they need help, that's one thing. That's missionary work. But there should be some interest that aligns with the United States interests if we're going to spend money, treasure, political capital, whatever, helping some other country. And that's very similar to President Trump's belief, or his foreign policy is very transactional. We're only going to do something for you if you do something for us. And a lot of people like that. Some people have a problem with it because sometimes it's just wrong, things that are happening or that are around the world that are just wrong, that are causing people to suffer. And we ought to, at very least, stand up for the people who are being unjustly oppressed. Whether or not we give them any money or send troops or anything, I believe that we should always do the right thing, no matter the cost. And so at least condemning things that are done that are unjust gives America the moral high ground. And taking a more transactional approach that we're going to side with whichever side is going to help America the most means that at some points we might actually be siding with evil. And righteousness exalts a nation. Sin is a reproach to any people. So the Lord holds success in store for the upright, right? And is a shield for those whose walk is blameless. That's the second chapter of Proverbs. So I mean, just from a biblical worldview, we should stand up for what's right, regardless of whether or not it is cost-effective or politically expedient or anything, because in the long run, being righteous is better than being on the winning side in some mortal contest. Now, that's my sermon for today, but because of the U.S. abandoning the Kurds in the 1970s, hundreds of thousands of them fled to Turkey and Iran, where they're now being persecuted in both of those places. As a matter of fact, the Kurds in Iran have probably the least amount of rights of any group of Kurds on planet Earth, and there are probably over 1 million of them there. Then in 2017, I was in Syria, and the Kurds held a non-binding referendum on independence to make their own state. 92% of people voted yes. They wanted to be their own country. Of course, the United States threw them right under the bus and opposed that vote and said, no, we don't think the Kurds deserve to have their own state. Baghdad agreed with that and put an exclamation point on their agreement by taking Kirkuk, which has a vast amount of oil wealth that the Kurds had and then lost. And Washington did nothing to stop it. The United States did nothing, just watched these Iranian-backed militias attack the oil fields in Kirkuk and take them away from the Kurds, and we didn't intervene at all. Didn't even say anything about it, really. Then in 2019, under the first Trump administration, the United States withdrew from Rojava in northern Syria and left the Kurds holding the bag. I was there when it happened. We watched the American military vehicles pulling out of the oil fields up there. And that's after the Kurds fought ISIS for us. You know, we supported the Kurds, but the Kurds did most of the fighting. And they lost 12,000 men dead fighting ISIS. So they expended 12,000 of their men's lives, and the United States went, and, well, we're not going to keep protecting you or backing you up, and just abruptly pulled troops out, which then led to an invasion by Turkey. So then Turkey moved in literally to the bases that the United States had just vacated and started attacking the Kurds in northern Syria. I was there. I filmed it. I saw it. We're going to be putting up some videos from those trips here in the next few days. We just left the Kurds exposed, and the Turks killed hundreds and hundreds of Kurds and displaced tens of thousands. Now, I want to read this quote by the Turkish commander. He's a great guy. I've met him. His name's Muslim Abdi. And General Abdi said to the U.S., "We did everything you asked us to do. We are your allies, and you're leaving us to be slaughtered." And I remember talking to one of his aides when we were there to meet with him in 2019. And I was saying, I'm so sorry. I wish our country was not abandoning you like this. And but there's nothing I can do about it. I'm just really sorry. And he looked at me and said, well, we're an optimistic lot. And we have a couple of proverbs. One of them is that the only friends the Kurds have are the mountains. The mountains are our only friends. And the other proverb that we use a lot is the United States will always do the right thing once it has expended all other options. And so it's kind of a wry, satirical take on what happened. And in the end, the United States did end up leaving some troops in Syria, and they've been there ever since. Now, under the second Trump administration, we're starting to pull those troops out. That's one of the reasons I'm going into Syria, is to report on that. Now, you might say, why would we even have troops in Syria at all? What's in it for the United States? Well, keep in mind that ISIS was never defeated. They were never actually defeated. Now, they did break up the caliphate that they had formed, in which they can land in Syria and Iraq and were declaring it their own country. They were issuing passports and even currency. There's ISIS money floating around out there. I've got a little bit of it, and it's very rare now, very hard to find. But that Daesh money just showed that they were very intent. They had taken over landmass greater than the United Kingdom, and they were planning on making that their own country. But then the world body, the United States, backing up the Kurds, Russia backing up the Syrian government under Bashar al-Assad, the Turks coming down from the north, pretending to help out with one hand while they were funding the Islamic State with the other hand. We proved that while I was here. And other countries all involved in destroying that caliphate that ISIS had declared. But at the end, when it was apparent that they were going to, I'll talk about Russia in just a second. I see your question. At the end, when it was apparent that ISIS was going to lose, they started to switch sides. And one night, overnight, about 40,000 ISIS fighters went to bed ISIS fighters and got up in the morning and were Turkish fighters wearing Turkish uniforms, Turkish flag over their base. So a lot of those guys just sort of melted back into the regular civilian populace, took off their uniforms and their black masks and all that, and they're still running around, and they're not sitting still. Those guys are still planning and executing shenanigans across Syria, without a doubt, and even into Europe, but especially even into Afghanistan and places like that, ISIS-K. So of the, I don't know, there was probably about, at one time, maybe 30 or 40,000 ISIS fighters and their families who were captured in that conflict by the Kurds and were put into like camps in places like Al-Hasaka and Kamishli up in the north. Well, they're still there. They haven't been let out. Every once in a while, some will escape, but those Islamic State fighters are still being held in those camps, and they are still every bit as radical as they were when they went in, if not more. Not only that, they've had the last 7-8 years to make lots of babies and then radicalize those children. So the United States pulling out of Syria, just think of it this way. Right now, Syria is a cauldron that has gasoline, kerosene, lighter fluid, some napalm mixed in there, some, just all the, every explosive chemical you can think of, all mixed together in just this slurry that's just ready to blow sky high. And the only thing keeping that from happening is the diluting influence of the United States, because we have troops. So region, and it could just go up like an absolute nuclear bomb anytime, because all of those factions are still just waiting for their moment to start killing each other. And the United States being there, that keeps the lid on things. Our troops are not sitting there doing nothing. Our troops that are in Syria and here in Iraq are still engaged in the fight against the Islamic State. So I know President Trump, in his first term, claimed victory over the Islamic State and said that we had destroyed ISIS. That wasn't completely true, because, like I said, there are still tens of thousands of ISIS fighters who are running around in Syria or in camps. And if it was true that we had completely dismantled the Islamic State and they were no longer a threat, then there would be no need for us to have any troops in Iraq and Syria. But we still have about 2,000 troops in Syria, although that's being drawn down by half now. We have several thousand troops, about 4,000, I think, here in Iraq. I saw some American military hardware today at the airport. They have, American attack helicopters and stuff like that that are at the airport here in Erbil. And those are being used from time to time to attack Islamic State cells that get uncovered around Iraq and into Syria. So if the United States completely pulls out, then it is highly likely, especially with the rise of HTS, that the Islamic State will make a resurgence across the region. And we'll start seeing more of those videos of them doing terrible things to people as they murder people across their area. There's a couple of good books I would recommend if you want to understand how bad they really are. One is called Brothers of the Gun, and it's a book written by a couple of brothers in Syria during the rise of the Islamic State. Very good book and highly recommend it. But anyway, back to the Kurds. They've learned the hard way that they can't trust anybody when it comes to geopolitical interests. And especially, they know that they can't trust a Trump administration to have their back. Now, strangely enough, the Israelis might be the big brother that they're looking for. The Kurds have made some overtures toward the Israelis and wanting to form alliances with them across southern Syria, probably so that they can have an option of actually keeping Rojava, okay, instead of losing it to HTS. Question, what do you think about the Kurds being one of the lost 10 tribes? No idea. I've never studied on the lost 10 tribes, so I'm sorry I can't answer that question. And there was another question I promised to get to. Let's see here. Scrolling. Thank you for all the comments. While I'm doing this, put down where you're watching from. I'd like to see in the comments where everybody's coming in from. That's always fascinating. And while we're at it, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and that you are, hit the like button as well. It does make a difference. I think we only have like 400 likes and there's 1,100 people watching. So please do hit the like button. It does make a difference. So Brian Perry's asking, what's the political, economic, and demographic future of Turkey? It's a very good question. Turkey is in a bad way economically and certainly politically. They took a hard left years ago when President Erdogan took over. And Erdogan is straight up Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, ISIS affiliated guy. And they have been using those militia groups that I mentioned, and the Syrian National Army, the Free Syrian Army, the HTS, all of those guys are made up of those former ISIS fighters. And they are proxy forces for Turkey. But Turkey is getting bolder all the time, and they believe now that they can actually send their own troops into Syria to try to affect or control areas that are closer to Israel. And the United States has taken issue with that, said that we don't want that to happen. Again, Turkey is a NATO ally, erstwhile, but should not be, for sure. And because of the economic policies, because of COVID, because of all the things that have happened in Turkey, the big earthquake they had and everything, the Turkish economy is in shambles. And that's one of the reasons why they've had a lot of protests in Turkey over the last few months, because the people are pushing for a regime change. Now, that's not going to go anywhere likely, because you just look at what happened the last time there was an uprising against Erdogan. He just went out and machine gunned everybody and put tens of thousands of people in prison, and that's what he's doing again now. So as people have gone out and started protesting against the government, they just get rolled up by the police or get shot or what have you. And now somebody said, I thought the Kurds made overtures toward HTS. They did. You're correct about that, William. The Kurds, watching what the Trump administration is doing, pulling troops out of the region, they're like, man, we're in big trouble, because if the U.S. leaves, that gives Turkey the green light to attack Rojava, and they can't stand up to the Turkish army. They've got, I don't know how many fighters the Kurds have now in Peshmerga, but it's nowhere close to Turkey's army. And Turkey has F-16s, and they've got tanks, and they've got all kinds of stuff that the Turks really don't have. much of. So the Turks would not be much of a match for, I'm sorry, the Kurds would not be much of a match for Turkey. And so they have to have a big brother in the region to hold off Turkey. Since the United States is apparently unwilling to be that big brother and backstop the Kurds have reached out to HTS with an olive branch, and HTS is saying, that's fine, you guys can come in under us, but you have to give up all your weapons. And the Kurds are like, oh, heck no. We've been double-crossed far too many times by much more trustworthy people than HTS. There's no way we're going to trust HTS and give up our guns. So now, keep in mind, they just had a couple days ago, what's today, the 20, oh, I'm sorry, no, day after tomorrow, they have a referendum or a meeting of Kurdish leaders in Syria to discuss this issue and to decide what they're going to do in terms of how they're going to relate to HTS. Are they going to try to maintain their sovereignty over Rojava, or are they going to roll themselves under HTS and become part of the new regime? Now, unfortunately, the United States and many European countries are encouraging Kurds to do the latter. They're encouraging them to just give up their rights, give up their guns, and just come under HTS, because the world desperately wants to see a stable government in Syria. The sad thing is, it appears that the United States and the rest of the world doesn't really care who it is or what their ideology is, as long as somebody will just enforce the rule of law in Syria again. So it'd be like us gladly turning over Afghanistan to the Taliban all over again. And we know how that worked out. It didn't work out very well for the people of Afghanistan, especially if you're female. And it is now, we've turned Afghanistan into exactly what it was before the war started, which is a haven for terrorist groups. Thank you very much, John. That's very kind of you. So if the United States pulls out of Syria and the Kurds are forced to submit to HTS, and HTS consolidates control over the whole of Syria, then you might as well just rename Syria to be the 51st state of Turkey, like Canada. I mean, it just, you might as well just roll it right into Turkey, because HTS is like Hezbollah to Iran. HTS to Turkey is as Hezbollah is to Iran. So because of that, it's really a bad idea to encourage the Kurds to submit themselves to HTS. Just terrible idea. It's yet another traitorous throwing of the Kurds under the bus to encourage them to go with HTS. And can you imagine? Hey, thank you very much. I didn't see what that was. Teresa, Canada needs prayers. Thank you. Yeah, the Canada does need prayers. Is it safe? Is it safe to go to Turkey as a single woman in a caravan? Probably not. I wouldn't want my daughter to go to Turkey as a single woman. No, I mean, people go to Turkey as tourists all the time, but Turkey is a autocratic, authoritarian state. They have a terrible human rights track record. They continue to persecute minorities like Armenians. And so, yeah, I wouldn't recommend it, especially as a single woman. Anytime you're going to a Muslim country, it's probably not a good idea to go as a single woman. Here in Kurdistan, you'd be fine. You could come to Erbil as a single woman and you'd be fine, no problem. But other than Erbil and maybe Dubai or the UAE, someplace like that, being a single woman in the Middle East is not usually a good idea. Now, I want to just point out that I'm going to be putting up updates once I get into Syria. I'm going to be putting up updates about that on my locals page over at chuckholton.com, but it's only going to be available to supporters. Why? Because I can't put it out on the internet as a whole. It's just from a security standpoint, that's just not a good idea, operational security being what it is. And I probably won't be able to do any live broadcasting from inside Syria, even though I've got my Starlink and I'll have a connection, but I'd be surprised if I have a chance to do any lives while I'm in there. But if you want to get those updates that I'm going to be posting, what I'll do is I'll film them. I'll wait a day or two so we're not in the same spot as we were when I filmed it, and then I'll put it up. But I'm only going to put it up for supporters until I get back from Syria and we're all out of the country safely. Then I'll start putting that stuff up over on YouTube. So if you want to be a week or 10 days ahead of the YouTube channel, just go become a supporter at chuckholton.com. Again, please like this podcast, this video. Just hit the button and share it, and that'll get the word out to more people, that more people need to see this content. So, look, I realize this is not an update on, okay, somebody's asking, is the Red Team's book going to be available for us? Yes. When the Red Team's book comes out, it will be available as a free download on locals. Actually, what we're doing is we're serializing it on my locals page, but only for supporters. So as long as you're a supporter, you can get my new book chapter by chapter as articles on chuckholton.com. And then when it's all said and done, we'll publish. Hey, MM, thank you very much. When it's all said and done, we'll publish the book through my publisher, and it'll be available everywhere once we do that. So, yeah, everybody, thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate you. And send me an email, Mike, and let me know about that other thing we talked about, if that got done or not. I'm sorry I didn't make the meeting, but so, all right. That's all I've got for tonight. It's about 8:30 at night here right now, and I'm pretty beat, as you can imagine. I've been on airplanes for the last day and a half. So I'm going to go on inside and try to get some sleep and get caught up a little bit, and I will be reporting again. There's just to give you a heads up, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go over to locals real quick, and I'm going to put a video up over there about what you can expect from me here while I'm in Iraq. And so that's just going to go up on locals right now, and I'll answer a couple of more questions on that over there. So thank you for watching. God bless you. Again, like and subscribe to the podcast. We'll see you next time.